You're listening to Heather McCain.
Welcome back to Seriously Spiritual with Heather McCain, where we talk about spiritual things in a practical, serious way. So this week was kind of interesting for me, right? I'm one of those people that don't have a lot of conflict. I don't get in fights with people. I've never yelled at my children. I don't seem to have a lot of conflict. I wasn't bullied when I was in school. And I had a situation this week that was really painful for me. And I really realized something that I've always known, but is a spiritual sort of concept. And it's sort of two things. The first thing is that most of the time when someone is hurting you, it is always projection. The reality is we're all souls having this human experience. And for whatever reason, other people can trigger us. And I really realized this week that no matter how anti-conflict you are, no matter how much you want to prove your worth to people, a lot of times the battle that they're experiencing is an eternal one. And it's hard for them to understand how your generosity or your kindness can be genuine if their wounds don't allow them to be that way with other people. So every time you do something kind or you do something giving, it feels transactional. And so what I really realized this week, or what I feel like is a good sort of soul concept to keep, right? Because we've all gone through this, right? Whether you're a very low conflict person or a more high conflict person, we've all dealt with conflict to some capacity. And I really realized that the key to it is if you don't let other people's reality be projected onto you and you stay grounded, and the people that love you do that as well, the reality is you can transition out of these things pretty quickly because everybody in the soul experience is looking for a reaction. And if you don't react, then ultimately they see that you're in a position where you're not sort of buying what they're selling. And then they can start to self-reflect. And that's how you sort of get apologies as soon as. So this week, as I was kind of contemplating things, I would say that really the key to all things, spirituality, conflict, is self-knowing, and surrounding yourself with people that know you too.
That was the portion of the show where Heather answers questions and emails from followers and applies spiritual principles to them. All right, Heather. So we have questions from a follower here, and it's kind of a two-parter. It says, "Can someone love you and still not be capable of choosing you? What does it mean when somebody leaves, comes back, and leaves again?"
Those are two really good questions, and they're definitely two questions, right? So, and it's so complicated because you could actually look at it in so many different angles because love itself is complicated. There's sort of two types of love, right? There's sort of what's this soul spiritual love. So that's when you have some kind of soulmate connection. And so the love is sort of this innate thing. And it tends to be that kind of feeling of love at first sight. And then there's real love, right? Which is sort of this all-encompass worldly love. And that's actually the more significant love because not only do you have the first part where it's that fundamental feeling where you feel drawn to someone, but it's also this component of choosing them. So real love, this kind of real worldly love, is self-sacrificial. So the feeling is one type of love, but sort of the action is the other. So the real answer is it depends, right? Can you do the first, have the feeling where they feel pulled to you, but don't choose you? Of course. Right? Happens all the time. This idea that if they wanted to, they would is not true. There's many components why people can feel something, and for wounds or life circumstances, can't choose it. But for that second love, that selfless love, no. If someone loves you in a way where your well-being, your needs, your potentials matter first, and you want to be chosen, right? We're taking out circumstances where they're toxic because that would be a different situation if they're on drugs or they're in a situation and they're trying to selflessly let you go. They can't do that without choosing you. So the reality is real love, all-encompassing love, a huge part of it is the choice. So that would be kind of the first part of the question.
What does it mean when someone leaves, comes back, and leaves again?
Well, it is very connected to the first part of this question, right? Because it means that they can't make the choice. It means that they had the feelings for you, but for whatever reason, usually rooted in some form of selfishness or woundedness. They can't say, but they're either addicted to you or the feeling or sort of what they get from you. Because the reality is there's actually very few things that are more selfish than that. So if someone is leaving and coming back and leaving, can they love you in the first way? The kind of feeling way, that sort of being drawn to you way? Sure. Do they fundamentally love you in a way that's good for you? No.
So, Heather, we have an email here, and this one says, are some relationships meant to awaken you rather than stay?
Yeah, I really like this question because I actually kind of come across this a lot in my spiritual life coaching. And it's this idea of, is something important? Is it spiritually significant? Can a relationship matter if it's not your forever relationship? And I think that the reality is that people, all people, come in and out, right? Because life, as I always say, is a soul school to sort of teach us things, guide us places. Life in a lot of ways is a video game where everything is sort of around you to kind of create these lessons. And so awakening is one thing that occurs when people kind of come into your life and it's karmic or it's spiritually complicated. There does kind of become this sort of spiritual awareness. It happens a lot with what is sort of called twin flame relationships. The one thing I would say to be careful of is that many times people use that to be obsessive, right? This idea that like they have a spiritual awakening, it's a sign that this person is meant to be their person. And so they start to kind of obsess over it. The reality is no matter what the type of connection, you should never get obsessed with something. Nothing that's meant for you will leave you or be toxic to you. And so, yes, the answer is that a relationship can cause spiritual awakening. A relationship cannot last and be important and matter and be spiritually important. And you have to be careful to try to not make everything that has spiritual importance to you last forever, because that's actually one of the most toxic things you can do.
Another question that we've received here is, how do you tell if you're grieving a person or their potential?
Yeah. So that's really an interesting question as well. There's a few different ways, but one of the kind of easiest ways, if you're just trying to kind of process for yourself, is the amount of time you've spent, right? I really notice people get very caught up very quickly, and that is always an idea, right? If you are caught up on someone and you don't know them very long and you didn't have any plans with them, you're caught up on the potential, right? That you can't know everything about them to be caught up in them or to even know if you want a life with them. So what happens is you fill that in with what you want and the potential of it, you project, and that's what you're hung up on. Now you can do this with longer relationships too. People change, good and bad. This idea that people don't change, that's simply not true. And so if you're caught up in an idea of how they were, but not how they are now, if you keep longing for or missing the version of them that they haven't been in a while, then you know you're also caught up in a potential or a version of them that they weren't. The reality is if you ever find yourself longing for experiences you didn't have or longing for who someone was, you're caught up in the potential.
All right, Heather. So we have another follower here who identifies as an empath as well. And they ask, how do I know where my feelings end and others begin?
Well, that's a really good question. And, we are all empathic to some capacity. It's just at different levels. Like some people can play basketball at different levels or sing. And kind of there are three main markers of how you can kind of know. And the first marker is do my logic, so does the voice in my head connect to what I'm feeling, right? So can I logically see how I've gotten to this strong emotion? If you can't, that always means you're absorbing it, right? Real emotion builds. So if you are in a position where you're feeling a strong emotion, it would have started at a seed if it was actually sort of your emotion. And then it will build. If it's something that you're absorbing, it's not. Something else is because energy is physical matter, right? It's part of quantum physics and mechanics. If you're absorbing someone else's energy, you tend to get much warmer, right? So there's a component of sort of feeling heat whenever you're absorbing, and that can be with someone's emotions, or it can just be with like that kind of vampire energy. You're going to feel, I mean, I've experienced this. So I've done scientific studies that kind of confirm it. You're going to feel sort of a heat to it. So that's another way of sort of being able to really identify it. And then the third is weirdly enough, that feeling of that you're going to cry. So obviously we all cry when we're sad, but we tend to just cry. If it's this feeling of like, almost like I'm going to get ill, like I'm nauseous, if you feel that about crying, that's almost always indicative that you're sort of absorbing other people's energy. And I would say, because I've said this before, people will ask, well, what's the solution? And there's a couple of different solutions, but water submersion is really effective. And so is essential oils. So they've found that kind of lavender and lilac and wild orange are very effective in sort of disconnecting to you, where you're kind of shutting down your chakras, which is how you're absorbing energy. So those can be kind of effective ways to do that. And if you're really highly empathic and you're going to like Disney World, I would suggest that you carry some of those things on you. That's what I do.
So Heather, we have an emailer here, and it looks to me, as I read the email, like they have a lot of relationships where they're kind of the fixers in the relationship. So the question that they ask is, why do I feel responsible for fixing other people's pain and problems?
There are two reasons for it, why people feel that way. And one is the kind of more simplistic one, which is you're a healer. So many times, if you're a healer, you naturally feel this sort of almost like intuitive spiritual obligation to fix other people. And it kind of goes hand in hand, because if you have both of these things, you're really going to feel that way. Because the second reason is because you've felt deeply alone. Many times when people have felt like, whether it's when they're a child or when they're older, and they've felt abandoned or alone, there's a spiritual component of the first law of the universe, which is divine oneness, that the more you feel alone, the more you feel an obligation to other people, and to make sure that they know that they're not alone, because that's such a fundamental principle. So when you add the two things together, you have a healer energy, and you've experienced what it truly feels like. It becomes almost a compulsion to sort of help other people. And I think that it's actually not even, I'll go one step further and say, I don't actually think that that is necessarily a bad thing, as long as you can do it with protective boundaries with yourself, right? Where you don't turn it into a hero complex where you feel a responsibility, but you allow yourself to sort of show up in a way that's unique and authentic in the world without feeling the obligation. And as soon as it starts to damage you in any way, you sort of remove yourself.
All right, Heather, we have another question here from a follower of yours, and they're asking, how do I deal with a part of my life that feels unfair?
Yeah, this is a good question. I've actually been dealing with this a lot lately, right? Because my 13-year-old child had to have spine surgery. Started losing his ability to walk, and it was kind of very dramatic. And he's having to go through a severe recovery. And both myself and my producer Cain, who's talking, have both dealt with pretty severe health things. And the answer is the fifth law of the universe, right? It's the law of plurality. It's this idea of things are not always karmic. They're not always a punishment. It's not about whether or not you deserve it. That life is a soul school, and that you have to experience the bad to be able to get the good. That you don't understand that you're full if you've never experienced what it feels like to be hungry. And so what I really realized is, it's very easy for us to perceive bad things differently than good things. And when you start seeing things through the lens of, this is the nature of the universe, and instead of saying, why me, with good and bad, you say, why not me, with good and bad. And the law of relativity, a lot of people think that it means whether the glass is half full or half empty, but it doesn't, right? It means whether or not it would be good or bad if it were half empty or half full anyway, right? If one of those perceptions mattered. And so a lot of the things that feel like they're very bad, a lot of it is perception. And if you know that it's the kind of breeding ground of empathy and sympathy and kindness, and it also allows you to truly enjoy when you're healthy, when you're full, when the world is good, it's easier to not dwell in the negative. And the other thing I would say on this, the one thing I've really learned through my many years of doing kind of the spiritual and intuitive coaching is that what you dwell on reciprocates. And so if you focus on the negative things in your life, that's where you'll vibrate and that's what you'll see. You feel it, you mourn it, but if you focus on the parts, even when you're really upset, right? Like I remember when I first got sick, I was so upset about it and I was upset about how I looked. But I was able to wear hair and it was way easier to get ready in the morning. And I dwelled on that part of it and it made the experience so much easier for me. So I think it's about, perceiving it through the law of plurality.
All right, Heather. Now let's take a letter from one of your followers, and I'll go ahead and read it to you and have you respond to it right now. Dear Heather, I'm writing because I feel like I've hit a wall and I don't know how to get past it. Lately, I've been struggling with the sense of apathy towards almost everything in my life. Things used to excite me, my hobbies, relationships, even my goals. They just don't seem to matter the way they used to. I'm not necessarily sad, but I'm not happy either. It's like I'm just going through the motions every day. I've tried to snap out of it by pushing myself to be more productive or positive, but that only seems to make me feel more frustrated and disconnected. Is this something that other people go through? How do I begin to care again? Why is everything feeling so flat? Sincerely, feeling numb.
So that is a very universal experience. And there are a few different answers to it. And I think that with the first part of the question, and also being able to honestly connect, a lot of times that sort of feeling of uninterest is associated with depression. And it's always really important to kind of look into that and take that hyper seriously because depression, just like anxiety or any other mental health condition, is a medical condition and something that should be, directly looked at. But many times, if there isn't a depressed component of it, so if you're not feeling sad feelings, it's just a loss of interest in your life. That is a spiritual principle. And it is kind of connected to not being where you're supposed to be. So this idea of being more positive or forcing yourself to do more in what you're already doing tends to actually make it worse. That in this situation, I believe, in many situations that look like this, it means that you're not in the right place. And so then you need to start intuitively looking inside of you. What is it that I've been focused on or I've had this pull, right? Because we're all intuitive and you're not going to get to this level without having some kind of pull associated with it. And so what is it that I've been thinking about I need to change? Is it my partner? Is it my job? Is it my location? Usually you start to get very, very sort of apathetic and uncomfortable in your own life when you're vibrationally and frequency stuck. And you'll notice that the area of which you're the most disinterested with this person, I believe it's work, would be the area that you need to change. But the reality is that it happens to all of us. And if you're in a situation that you legitimately can't change, then you have to start changing how you perceive it. And there are many techniques to do that. But I think that the reality is I've really found that if you feel like there's something you can't find joy in, you're looking in the wrong areas of how you can find joy. So if I have to rake outside every day, I don't have to convince myself that I like raking. I can convince myself that I like the walk from, the front yard to the backyard. And so there are many techniques, but it's very normal. And in fact, if you haven't experienced it to some capacity, you just haven't yet because everybody goes through that.
All right, so now's the portion of the show. It's my favorite part of the show, Heather, where I get to talk to you and we get to have ourselves a little bit of a soul talk. And I think there's plenty of things going on in the world right now that we can probably talk about, isn't there?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting, Kane, because you and I tend to talk about politics sometimes. It's something that's always mutually kind of intrigued us, and obviously, this isn't by any means a political show. But I was really thinking about kind of this spiritual concept of like political beliefs and beliefs and systems, and how to deal with conflicting belief and how to move in a world where you're being respectful, being authentic to who you are. And I was just wondering if you had any situations where you felt like you couldn't share what you believed politically. Do you feel like there are situations where it isn't appropriate? What are your feelings about all that?
Well, Heather, in my life, what's strange is, well, it's not really strange because you're kind of a safe space for me to talk about politics and things. I don't really talk about it to other people, and I don't because I don't like the way it makes me feel. So a lot of times I will take the middle road, and I'll just not really. I stay authentic to myself if somebody really wants to dig in, but I'm like afraid to talk about it. So, and I think there's a lot of people like that. I mean, I have family members who are so wrapped up in the politics and how they feel. I mean, it can even affect like family outings and things like
Oh,
that. And I love them dearly, but I'm very bothered by everything that's going on, like everyone is, and I just want people to show more compassion to each other.
I could not agree more. And I think you're right. And I did always know that you were not as politically um, open, and I always feel honored to get to have those conversations. But I think that's at the core of it too, Kane. I think that it's really about compassion, and I think the other thing, this idea that there's one true opinion, I really don't subscribe to that, right? And I think that the reality of the situation is all things are gray, everything is nuanced, and any political person like belief that somebody holds, even if it's extremely different than mine, I can see that there has to be some proponent of truth to it, or that they're being lied to or something. So I think that the problem is that we really, it's a lot of you're a bad person because you do this or you believe this. And I think that what's going on right now in the world is hard, it's dark. I, as you know, do a lot of international consulting, right? Intuitive business consulting, intuitive life coaching, empathic life coaching. And a lot of my clients are in Dubai, and they're literally currently dealing with being bombed. They've lived there for 10 years. They're from the US, and they're literally dealing with bombs. And what I really realized that, it's not really about the perspective of who's right or who's wrong. It's about compassion. And I think that we're so divided. And I think that the reality is it's more respectful to not push your beliefs on people. If they want to have a conversation, great. But ultimately, you should always stand up for other human beings. And sometimes that happens in political conversations.
Well, I think that there is people are capable of having a back and forth with each other, even if they feel strongly on one side or the other, and they can still get their point across, but they can do it in a way that shows integrity. And that's what I think that
Yes.
especially, I mean, obviously you and I talk about this all the time. Social media is a horrible place to go if you want to go talk to somebody about religion, about politics, about all of these things. I'm not saying that there probably are spaces somewhere deep down in
I'm
the,
sorry.
but I don't see them. Most of it, it's like people are on one side or the other. So I say, when this is just my opinion, and I'll ask you, Heather, like when a person has a conversation with somebody that they know is like politically or whatever on the other side of the fence, they don't have to sit there like it's a chess game. It doesn't have to be a chess move of,
Yes.
oh, here I'm making this move here to prove you wrong. It can just be a intellectual conversation with two human beings.
Yeah. I couldn't actually agree more. And I think that that is actually the answer, right? Is to not perceive it as a game that you have to win. It's a lot of owning the other people. We really got into that, like, I own you. And then it got really dangerous with social media because people have different facts so that we're not even. But I think that if you go into it, not with this idea of winning, but really being open to what they're saying, right? I can know if somebody is saying something to me that I know I don't agree with. I try to listen to what parts of it make sense. You want to actually try to learn what they're thinking, because the only way you're going to actually change minds isn't by shutting someone down or owning them. They've done study after study, Cain, right? The more that you have a belief system and somebody shows you proof that it's wrong, you actually believe it more, right? Because you can't, if it's black and white, you can't actually process. And so you just check it off as crap. But if you're able to listen to what they say and then counter based off of that, that's how you can really get places. And like, I literally just had a conversation with someone not that long ago who thought that they were really anti-hunting. And like, the reality is when they were able to have the conversation, they started to kind of realize that that's actually much more humane than these other things. And that ultimately you can't make the world be vegan. And so they started to realize that they were actually very for kind of kosher hunting or hunting in a humane way. And you're only going to get to understanding by not trying to win.
There's the caveat of it all, which is then when people get in a herd, so to speak, get the herd mentality going, and you get multiple people in a discussion about, then it becomes something completely different. Then a person like myself begins to cave because I'm almost off put or even afraid of the other group's reaction, and so you start to give in a little bit, and it's not a win or loss type thing, but you start to take on their mentality only because of the herd mentality.
Well, totally. And I mean, I think that's very true and very human nature to self-protect, right? Like if I see something I really disagree with, like on social media, or if I'm in a group of people and I know they all have a similar like ideology that's different than mine, I won't say anything to protect myself, right? But I think that the reality is if you find yourself in those situations, it's okay to not be judged, like not to judge yourself for it. You know, I have a lot of clients that hold different political beliefs than I do. And the reality is not every space, you don't have to own your truth all the time. Right. And if something doesn't feel safe, or you know that somebody isn't receptive to hear what you have to say, it's okay to be silent. It's okay to even agree with the parts of it that you do. And that's really normal, especially in these kind of like bullying sort of setups, which it does seem the herd mentality with politics always is.
I think this conversation is important, Heather. I think that we have to have more conversations like this, even though we're a safe space with each other. Obviously we share in a lot of ideals and everything, but I think that conversations like this need to be spread to everybody so that everybody kind of gets on board with the idea that at the end of the day, we're all just people. We're all just trying to live our lives and try to figure out, what we're even doing here. And so it all just comes back to what we said earlier, which is compassion. Just have compassion for people, have an intellectual conversation, and just try to respect people's opinions and stay authentic to yourself.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. And I think it all comes back to, what I brought up earlier today is that the first law of the universe is divine oneness. And when you realize when you're tearing someone else apart, you're tearing yourself apart. We can handle all of these conversations with a lot more love. Well, thank you so much for listening to Seriously Spiritual. I'd say on this week, as you go through your week, just remember what we kept talking about today, which is this idea of divine oneness, that the reality is we're all a collective soul having human experiences, and that the way that you move in the world and the way that you impact someone directly impacts you. And so as you move through the world this week, really embrace that idea of how I treat my neighbors, how I treat myself, because it is fundamentally what you're doing. What you project onto other people is really something that's internalizing and impacting you. So as you walk through the week, just remember that we are all divinely one. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next week.